The year is 1555. Hatfield House, a sprawling estate north of London, stands as a gilded cage for the young Princess Elizabeth Tudor. The crisp autumn air carries the scent of woodsmoke and damped earth as it swirls through the manicured gardens, past the brick walls that both protect and confine her. Within those walls, life unfolds with a measured rhythm, a careful dance around the simmering tensions of a kingdom divided. Elizabeth, barely in her early 20s, moves through her days with a quiet grace that belies the sharp mind and unwavering spirit within. Her red gold hair, a legacy of her father, King Henry VIII, is neatly arranged, framing a face that is both intelligent and undeniably regal. Though she is treated with the outward respect due to a princess, there is an underlying current of suspicion that taints every interaction, every smile. Her half-sister, Queen Mary I, a staunch Catholic, views Elizabeth, a Protestant, with a wary eye, fearing that she might become a rallying point for those who oppose her reign. Elizabeth's days are filled with study and reflection. Her tutor, Roger Ascham, a man of considerable learning and gentle disposition, guides her through the intricacies of classical literature, philosophy, and languages. He is one of the few people she truly trusts, a confidant who understands the precariousness of her position. Ascham recognizes Elizabeth's extraordinary intellect and fosters her love of learning, providing her with the intellectual weapons she will one day need to navigate the treacherous currents of court politics. In the library, surrounded by towering shelves filled with ancient texts, Elizabeth finds solace and strength. She devours books on history, statecraft, and the art of rhetoric, absorbing the lessons of the past and preparing herself for an uncertain future. She is particularly drawn to the stories of strong, independent women who defied expectations and wielded power with skill and cunning. She sees in them a reflection of her own aspirations, a glimmer of hope that she too might one day rise above the limitations imposed upon her by her gender and her circumstances. But knowledge, as Ascham often reminds her, is a double-edged sword. The more she learns, the more she understands the dangers that surround her. She is acutely aware that her very existence is a threat to Mary's reign, a potential spark that could ignite a rebellion. The whispers of plots and conspiracies reach her ears, carried by loyal servants and cautious friends. She hears tales of Protestants being burned at the stake for their beliefs, of nobles plotting to overthrow Mary and replace her with a more amenable monarch. Elizabeth knows that she must tread carefully, avoid any appearance of disloyalty, and protect herself from those who would seek to use her as a pawn in their political games. Her Protestant faith is a constant source of anxiety. She attends Mass outwardly, conforming to the religious practices of the court, but in secret she clings to her own beliefs. She reads forbidden Protestant texts, finding comfort and guidance in their words. She prays in private, seeking strength and courage from God. She knows that if her true faith were discovered, she could face imprisonment or worse. Her relationships with the members of her household are carefully cultivated. She relies on the unwavering loyalty of her trusted servants, women like Bessie Blunt, who have been with her since childhood. Bessie serves as her lady-in-waiting, her confidant, and her protector. She shields Elizabeth from unwanted attention, filters the information that reaches her, and provides her with a much-needed sense of normalcy in a world of intrigue and danger. Elizabeth is also aware that she is being watched, not only by Mary's spies, but also by foreign ambassadors and ambitious English lords. They all see her as a potential asset, a valuable prize to be won. Marriage proposals arrive from powerful princes and wealthy nobles, each seeking to secure an alliance with the future Queen of England. Elizabeth understands the political implications of marriage, the potential to strengthen her position and secure the succession, but she also fears the loss of her independence, the prospect of being controlled by a husband who might seek to usurp her power. She observes the workings of the court with a keen eye, learning the rules of the game, identifying the players and assessing their strengths and weaknesses. She understands that survival in this environment requires cunning, patience, and a willingness to compromise. She learns to mask her true feelings, to speak in riddles, to play different roles depending on the audience. She becomes a master of diplomacy, a skilled negotiator, and a shrewd judge of character. As Mary's reign progresses, the atmosphere at Hatfield House becomes increasingly tense. The Queen's health is failing, and the question of succession looms large. Elizabeth knows that her time may be approaching, that she may soon be called upon to assume the throne. But she also knows that the path to power is fraught with peril, that she will face opposition from those who believe that a woman is not fit to rule. She steels herself for the challenges ahead, preparing her mind and spirit for the responsibilities that await her. She knows that she must be strong, resolute, and unwavering in her determination to protect England and secure its future. She is determined to prove that she is worthy of the crown, that she can rule with wisdom, justice, and compassion. One evening, as the sun sets, casting long shadows across the gardens of Hatfield House, Elizabeth is in her private study, poring over a forbidden Protestant text. The words resonate deeply within her, filling her with a sense of purpose and resolve. She is interrupted by the hurried entrance of Bessie, her face pale with concern. "Your Highness," Bessie whispers, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire, "there are rumors the Queen is not well. Her physicians say the end may be near." Elizabeth closes the book, her heart pounding in her chest. She rises from her chair and walks to the window, gazing out at the darkening landscape. The fate of England, her own fate, hangs in the balance. "I know, Bessie," she says, her voice calm and steady despite the turmoil within. "I have heard the whispers." Bessie approaches her, her eyes filled with anxiety. "What will you do, Your Highness? What will happen to us all?" Elizabeth turns to face her, her expression resolute. "We will be ready, Bessie. We will be ready for whatever comes." She looks at her trusted maid and confidant and says, "Knowledge is power, Bessie, and power is what I need. If you appreciate this journey into the heart of a future queen, be sure to subscribe and like this story to follow Elizabeth as she strives for the throne." Her gaze then returns to the darkening horizon, her mind already racing, anticipating the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. The throne awaits, but so do countless enemies, both foreign and domestic. The game has begun, and Elizabeth is determined to win. The weight of the crown and the future of England rests upon her young shoulders. The final hours of Mary's reign are a countdown to either her ultimate rise or her catastrophic fall. Everything hinges on what comes next. The air crackles with unspoken tension. The flickering candlelight danced across Elizabeth's face, illuminating the barely suppressed tremor in her hands as she read the official proclamation. Mary was dead. Queen Mary was dead. And Elizabeth Tudor, once a princess teetering on the precipice of oblivion, was now Queen of England. The weight of the crown, the sheer immensity of the responsibility, settled upon her shoulders like a physical burden, far heavier than the velvet and jewels that would soon adorn her. The messengers arrived in a steady stream, each bearing declarations of fealty, pronouncements of support, and most subtly veiled inquiries about her intentions. The mood in Hatfield House transformed overnight. Where once there had been hushed whispers and furtive glances, there was now an almost feverish activity, a buzz of anticipation and ambition that Elizabeth found both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. Within days, the first marriage proposal arrived. Philip II of Spain, Mary's widower, offered himself as consort, a strategic alliance that would maintain the Catholic faith in England and secure the bonds between two powerful nations. Elizabeth read the proposal with a cool detachment, recognizing the political advantages such a union might offer. Spain's wealth, its military might, its influence on the continent, all would be at her disposal. But the thought of marrying Philip, a man she barely knew, a man associated with her sister's harsh reign and the persecution of Protestants, filled her with a profound sense of unease. She pictured herself a mere figurehead, a pawn in Philip's grand game, her own power and autonomy completely eroded. The Spanish proposal opened the floodgates. Scarcely a day passed without another envoy arriving, each bearing the suit of a foreign prince or an ambitious English nobleman. The French king proposed his son, the Duke of Anjou, a union that would potentially create a powerful alliance against Spain. The Holy Roman Emperor offered an archduke, promising access to the vast resources of the Habsburg Empire. Closer to home, suitors emerged from the English nobility. Robert Dudley, her childhood friend and the master of the horse, a man of charm and ambition whose affections were as undeniable as they were politically dangerous. The Earl of Arundel, a wealthy and influential nobleman with impeccable lineage, and a host of other lesser lords, each eager to secure the ultimate prize, the hand of the Queen of England. The Privy Council, a collection of seasoned politicians and advisors inherited from Mary's reign, wasted no time in urging Elizabeth to make a decision. William Cecil, a shrewd and experienced statesman who had cautiously served both Mary and Edward, became her most trusted advisor. He argued forcefully for the necessity of marriage, emphasizing the precariousness of her position. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice low and urgent during a private audience, "England needs an heir. Without a clear successor, we risk civil war, foreign invasion, and the undoing of all that your father King Henry achieved. A swift marriage is the only way to secure the succession and ensure the stability of the realm." Elizabeth listened intently, acknowledging the wisdom of Cecil's words. She understood the political realities, the urgent need for an heir, the dangers that threatened England from both within and without, but she also recognized the trap that marriage represented. To marry was to surrender a portion of her power, to subject herself to the will of a husband, to risk becoming a mere consort rather than a sovereign ruler. She had witnessed firsthand the powerlessness of her mother, Anne Boleyn, and the tragic consequences of being a queen consort at the mercy of a powerful king. She refused to repeat that history. "Cecil," she replied, her voice firm despite the turmoil within, "I understand the concerns you raise. I assure you, the welfare of England is paramount in my thoughts, but I will not be rushed into a decision. I will not be treated as a mere broodmare, a vessel for producing heirs. I am the Queen of England, and I will choose my own path." And so began the dance. Elizabeth, with her sharp intellect and innate political acumen, embarked on a delicate game of courtship and diplomacy. She entertained the suitors, listened to their proposals, weighed their strengths and weaknesses, and skillfully deflected their advances without giving any definitive answer. She learned to use her charm and wit as weapons, flattering and teasing, promising and postponing, always keeping her options open. She instructed her spies to gather information on each suitor, digging into their pasts, uncovering their secrets and assessing their true intentions. She learned of Philip's ambition to maintain Spanish dominance over Europe, of Anjou's volatile temperament and questionable loyalty, of Arundel's debts and extravagant lifestyle, and of Dudley's unwavering devotion, which, while flattering, also made him a potentially dangerous player in the game of power. Robert Dudley, in particular, presented a unique challenge. Their shared history, their undeniable affection, and his constant presence at court made him a figure of intense speculation. Rumors swirled around them, fueled by envy and suspicion. Some whispered that they were already secretly married, others that Dudley was plotting to usurp the throne. Elizabeth recognized the danger of their relationship, the potential for scandal and political instability, but she found herself drawn to his company, his wit, and his unwavering support. She trusted him, perhaps more than she trusted anyone else in her court. One evening, as they walked together in the gardens of Whitehall Palace, Dudley pressed his suit with a rare intensity. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice low and urgent, "you know my heart. I have loved you since we were children. I would do anything for you, give anything for you. Marry me, and together we will rule England. I will be your strength, your protector, your loyal servant." Elizabeth stopped, her gaze fixed on the moonlit waters of the Thames. She knew that Dudley spoke the truth. His devotion was absolute, his ambition fueled by his love for her, but she also knew that marrying him would be a disastrous mistake. It would alienate the nobility, incite rebellion, and provide her enemies with the perfect weapon to use against her. "Robert," she said softly, "I cherish your friendship, your loyalty, but I cannot marry you. I am the Queen of England, and my duty is to my country, not to my own desires." Dudley's face fell, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and disappointment. He knew that Elizabeth's decision was final, that she had chosen the crown over her heart, but he could not help but feel a sense of betrayal, a sense that he had been used and discarded. As the months passed, the pressure on Elizabeth intensified. The Privy Council grew increasingly impatient, demanding a swift resolution to the marriage question. Foreign ambassadors hinted at dire consequences if she continued to delay. The English people, anxious about the succession, grew restless and uneasy. Elizabeth, however, remained steadfast in her determination to rule in her own right. She understood that marriage was not the only way to secure the throne. She could use diplomacy, alliances, and her own political skills to maintain her power and protect England from its enemies. She began to cultivate alliances with Protestant nations, sending emissaries to Germany and the Netherlands, offering support to those who shared her religious beliefs and her opposition to Spanish dominance. She also began to consolidate her own power base within the court, rewarding loyalty and punishing dissent. She appointed William Cecil as her principal secretary, entrusting him with the day-to-day management of the government. She surrounded herself with intelligent and capable advisors, men and women who shared her vision for England and who were willing to serve her loyally. But even as Elizabeth solidified her power, the threats against her continued to mount. Catholic factions, supported by foreign powers, plotted to overthrow her and replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots, her cousin and the Catholic claimant to the English throne. Rumors of conspiracies and assassination attempts filled the air, creating an atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion. Mary, Queen of Scots, a beautiful and charismatic woman who had been forced to abdicate the Scottish throne, had become a focal point for Catholic opposition to Elizabeth's rule. She was held captive in England, but her very existence posed a constant threat to Elizabeth's security. Catholic nobles saw her as the rightful heir to the English throne, and plots to free her and place her on the throne were constantly being hatched. The most dangerous of these plots was the Ridolfi plot, a conspiracy involving a network of Catholic nobles, foreign ambassadors, and even members of Elizabeth's own court. The plotters planned to assassinate Elizabeth, free Mary, and launch a Spanish invasion of England. The plot was eventually uncovered by Elizabeth's spies, and the conspirators were arrested and executed. But the Ridolfi plot served as a stark reminder of the dangers that Elizabeth faced, and the lengths to which her enemies would go to remove her from the throne. Elizabeth felt increasingly isolated, surrounded by enemies both within and without. She trusted no one completely, knowing that even her closest advisors might be secretly plotting against her. She slept with a sword by her side, and she changed her route whenever she traveled, fearing an assassination attempt. One cold November evening, as Elizabeth sat alone in her private chamber at Whitehall Palace, poring over documents and intelligence reports, a messenger arrived with an urgent dispatch. The dispatch contained evidence of a new plot to assassinate Elizabeth and replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots. This plot, known as the Babington plot, was even more dangerous than the Ridolfi plot. It involved a group of young Catholic nobles who were determined to kill Elizabeth at all costs. The evidence also suggested that Mary, Queen of Scots, was directly involved in the plot, that she had been corresponding with the conspirators and encouraging them to carry out their plan. Elizabeth felt a cold wave of anger wash over her. Mary, her own cousin, the woman she had sheltered and protected for so long, had betrayed her in the most heinous way imaginable. She had plotted to kill her, to usurp her throne, and to plunge England into chaos and civil war. Elizabeth knew that she could no longer ignore the threat that Mary posed. She had to make a decision that would determine the fate of England and her own future. She could continue to imprison Mary, hoping to contain her and prevent her from causing further trouble, but that would only prolong the danger and allow her enemies to continue plotting against her. Or she could order Mary's execution, removing her from the board once and for all, but that would provoke outrage from Catholic powers and potentially lead to war. The decision weighed heavily on Elizabeth. She knew that either choice would have profound consequences, but she also knew that she could not afford to delay any longer. The safety of England, the security of her throne, and her own life were at stake. She summoned William Cecil to her chamber, and together they reviewed the evidence against Mary. Cecil, a staunch Protestant and a staunch supporter of Elizabeth, urged her to order Mary's execution. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice grave, "Mary is a cancer on this realm. She is a constant source of unrest and rebellion. As long as she lives, England will never be safe. You must remove her for the good of the country." Elizabeth listened to Cecil's arguments, but she hesitated. She had always felt a certain kinship with Mary, a sense of shared destiny as female rulers in a world dominated by men. She also knew that ordering Mary's execution would be a controversial and unpopular decision, one that would be condemned by many, both at home and abroad. But in the end, Elizabeth knew that she had no choice. She could not allow her personal feelings to cloud her judgment. She was the Queen of England, and her duty was to protect her people, even if it meant sacrificing her own conscience. "Cecil," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "prepare the warrant." The consequences of that decision were immediate and far-reaching. News of Mary's impending execution spread like wildfire throughout England and Europe, provoking outrage and condemnation. Catholic powers threatened war, and even some of Elizabeth's own advisors expressed doubts about the wisdom of her decision. Elizabeth, however, remained resolute. She knew that she had done what was necessary to protect England. She had chosen power over sentiment, security over compassion. She had sacrificed her own peace of mind for the good of her country. But as she signed the death warrant, Elizabeth could not help but feel a pang of regret. She had condemned her own cousin to death, a woman who had once been her friend and ally. She had crossed a line, a point of no return. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, was a watershed moment in Elizabeth's reign. It marked the beginning of a new era, an era of heightened tensions, increased threats, and constant danger. But it also marked the beginning of Elizabeth's transformation from a cautious and hesitant ruler into a bold and decisive leader. She had proven that she was willing to do whatever it took to protect her throne and her country. And as the shadow of war loomed on the horizon, Elizabeth knew that her greatest challenges were yet to come. Elizabeth's refusal echoed in the drafty halls of Whitehall, magnifying into a discordant drone of dissent. Each rejected suitor, each evaded promise, fueled the smoldering resentment of those who believed a queen should be led, not lead. The Duke of Norfolk, emboldened by whispers of Catholic support and his own inflated sense of self-importance, began to subtly shift his allegiance. Banquets became breeding grounds for seditious talk, masked balls concealed clandestine meetings. Norfolk's ambition, fed by the promise of marriage to Mary, Queen of Scots, solidified into a tangible threat. The Ridolfi plot unfurled, a spiderweb of conspiracy stretching across the Channel to Rome and Madrid. Roberto di Ridolfi, an Italian banker with papal connections, moved between the courts, carrying coded messages and promises of military intervention. The plot aimed to assassinate Elizabeth, install Mary on the throne, and restore Catholicism to England. Cecil's network of spies, ever vigilant, intercepted the missives, piecing together the dangerous puzzle. Norfolk, implicated in the conspiracy, found himself trapped in a tightening net of evidence. Interrogations began, subtle at first, then escalating in intensity. Norfolk, initially defiant, eventually cracked under pressure, revealing the extent of the plot and the involvement of foreign powers. His confession sent shockwaves through the court, shattering the veneer of loyalty and exposing the deep divisions within the realm. Norfolk was arrested, imprisoned in the Tower, and his fate hung precariously in the balance. The Northern Rebellion erupted, fueled by religious grievances and aristocratic discontent. The Earls of Northumberland and Westmoreland, Catholic nobles from the north of England, raised their banners in open revolt, calling for the restoration of the old faith. Their forces marched south, capturing Durham Cathedral and celebrating Mass in defiance of Elizabeth's Protestant reforms. The rebellion, though ultimately unsuccessful, exposed the vulnerability of Elizabeth's regime and the continued strength of Catholic sentiment in the country. Elizabeth, facing a direct challenge to her authority, dispatched troops to quell the uprising. The rebel forces, poorly equipped and lacking popular support, were quickly defeated. Northumberland and Westmoreland fled to Scotland, seeking refuge with Mary, Queen of Scots. Westmoreland escaped to the continent, but Northumberland was captured and eventually executed for treason. The rebellion left a trail of bloodshed and bitterness, further hardening religious divisions and intensifying the persecution of Catholics. Mary, Queen of Scots, became the focal point of Catholic hopes and conspiracies. Her very existence posed a constant threat to Elizabeth's reign. Imprisoned in England after fleeing Scotland, Mary remained a symbol of Catholic resistance and a potential claimant to the throne. Correspondence flowed between Mary and her supporters, often smuggled in and out of her confinement. These letters, often encoded, contained pleas for assistance, promises of rebellion, and veiled threats against Elizabeth. Each intercepted message added another layer of suspicion and paranoia to Elizabeth's court. The pressure mounted on Elizabeth to resolve the Scottish question once and for all. To execute a queen, even a deposed one, was an act fraught with danger, likely to provoke outrage and retaliation from Catholic powers. But to allow Mary to live was to invite further conspiracies and risk the stability of the realm. The Jesuit mission intensified, with priests infiltrating England disguised as merchants or travelers, spreading Catholic propaganda and inciting resistance to Elizabeth's rule. Edmund Campion, a brilliant and charismatic Jesuit, became a symbol of Catholic defiance. He traveled throughout England, preaching in secret and administering the sacraments to clandestine congregations. Campion's eloquence and dedication attracted a large following, but also drew the attention of Elizabeth's spies. He was eventually captured, tortured, and executed for treason. Campion's martyrdom further inflamed religious passions and intensified the persecution of Catholics. The government responded with increasingly harsh measures, imposing heavy fines for non-attendance at Anglican services and enacting stricter laws against Catholic priests and recusants. The Throckmorton plot emerged, revealing a conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and replace her with Mary. Francis Throckmorton, a young Catholic nobleman, acted as a courier for coded messages between Mary and the Spanish ambassador, Bernardino de Mendoza. The plot involved a planned invasion by Spanish forces, supported by English Catholics. Walsingham's agents uncovered the plot, intercepting Throckmorton's correspondence and arresting him for treason. Under torture, Throckmorton confessed, revealing the details of the conspiracy and the involvement of Mendoza. Elizabeth expelled Mendoza from England, further straining relations with Spain. The Throckmorton plot reinforced Elizabeth's conviction that Mary posed a direct threat to her life and her throne. Calls for Mary's execution grew louder, but Elizabeth hesitated, reluctant to take such a drastic step. The Babington plot, perhaps the most dangerous and decisive of all, sealed Mary's fate. Anthony Babington, a young Catholic nobleman, organized a conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and free Mary from captivity. Babington corresponded directly with Mary, outlining the details of the plot and seeking her approval. Walsingham, however, had infiltrated Babington's circle, planting a double agent to intercept the letters. Mary, desperate for freedom and convinced that Elizabeth's assassination was the only way to achieve it, wrote back to Babington, endorsing the plot. This letter, intercepted by Walsingham, provided undeniable proof of Mary's involvement in treason. Babington and his co-conspirators were arrested, tried and executed. The evidence against Mary was overwhelming. A commission was convened to investigate her involvement in the Babington plot. Mary refused to acknowledge the authority of the commission, claiming that she was a foreign queen and not subject to English law. However, the commission found her guilty of treason, based on the intercepted letters and the testimony of witnesses. Elizabeth faced an agonizing decision. To execute Mary was to risk war with Spain and alienate Catholic powers across Europe. It was also a violation of the sacred principle of the divine right of kings. But to allow Mary to live was to invite further conspiracies and risk the overthrow of her own government. The Privy Council, led by Cecil and Walsingham, urged Elizabeth to sign Mary's death warrant, arguing that the security of the realm demanded it. Parliament petitioned Elizabeth to execute Mary, expressing the overwhelming sentiment of the English people. Elizabeth agonized over the decision for months, torn between her personal feelings and her political responsibilities. She vacillated between signing the death warrant and seeking alternative solutions, such as banishing Mary from England. But the weight of evidence and the relentless pressure from her advisors ultimately proved too much to bear. The warrant was drafted, debated, and redrafted, each phrase scrutinized for its potential consequences. Elizabeth stalled, feigning illness, claiming moral objections, and demanding further proof. Each delay fueled anxieties both at home and abroad. The Spanish ambassador, Mendoza, now in Paris, intensified his efforts to rally support for Mary, promising Spanish intervention if Elizabeth dared to execute a queen. Within the English court, fear mingled with impatience. The queen's indecision was seen as weakness, and whispers of plots to circumvent her authority began to circulate. Elizabeth, aware of the growing unrest, found herself increasingly isolated. Finally, driven by a combination of fear, political necessity, and perhaps a grudging acceptance of her own destiny, Elizabeth signed the death warrant. She handed it to William Davison, her secretary, with instructions to keep it safe and to consult with the Privy Council. But she did not explicitly authorize him to send it to the executioner. This ambiguity would later become a source of contention, as Elizabeth sought to distance herself from the execution. Davison, acting on the advice of the Privy Council, sent the warrant to Fotheringhay Castle, where Mary was imprisoned. The execution was swift and brutal. Mary, Queen of Scots, was beheaded on February 8, 1587, in the Great Hall of Fotheringhay Castle. She faced her death with courage and dignity, professing her Catholic faith and asserting her innocence of treason. The execution sent shockwaves across Europe. Catholic powers condemned Elizabeth as a tyrant and vowed revenge. Spain, already preparing for war with England, used Mary's execution as a pretext for invasion. Elizabeth, initially relieved that the threat posed by Mary had been removed, was soon overwhelmed by the diplomatic fallout. She claimed that Davison had acted without her authority and had him imprisoned in the Tower. This attempt to deflect blame, however, did little to quell the outrage of Catholic Europe. The drums of war beat louder. Philip II of Spain, fueled by religious zeal and imperial ambition, prepared the Spanish Armada, a vast fleet of warships intended to invade England and overthrow Elizabeth. The Armada represented the greatest threat to England since the Norman conquest. England braced itself for invasion. The English navy, smaller but more maneuverable than the Armada, prepared to meet the Spanish fleet in the English Channel. The English army, though relatively small, was well-trained and determined to defend their country. Elizabeth rallied her troops with a stirring speech at Tilbury, declaring that she had the heart and stomach of a king and would fight to defend her realm. The Spanish Armada sailed from Lisbon in May 1588, a formidable force of over 130 ships. The English navy, under the command of Lord Howard of Effingham and Sir Francis Drake, engaged the Armada in a series of running battles in the English Channel. The English ships, faster and more agile, harassed the Armada, disrupting its formation and inflicting damage. The Spanish ships, heavily armed but unwieldy, struggled to respond effectively. The English also used fireships, setting ablaze several ships and sending them drifting into the Armada, causing panic and confusion. The decisive battle took place off the coast of Gravelines. The English navy, using superior tactics and firepower, inflicted a heavy defeat on the Armada. The Spanish ships, battered and demoralized, were forced to retreat. As they sailed north around Scotland and Ireland, they were battered by storms, losing many more ships. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was a turning point in English history. It marked the beginning of England's rise as a major naval power and secured Elizabeth's place as one of the greatest rulers of England. The victory was celebrated throughout England with bonfires, processions, and Thanksgiving services. Elizabeth, hailed as a national hero, became a symbol of English resistance to foreign aggression. Within the court, however, the victory masked a deeper disquiet. The cost of war, both in terms of money and lives, was immense. The English economy was strained, and poverty and unrest were widespread. Elizabeth, ever pragmatic, focused on consolidating her power and restoring stability to the realm. She continued to rule with a firm hand, suppressing dissent and maintaining religious conformity. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, and the defeat of the Spanish Armada had secured her throne, but at a considerable price. Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, had chosen power over marriage, and in doing so, had shaped the destiny of England. The chaos, the conspiracies, and the constant threat of invasion had tested her resolve and hardened her heart. The decision to sign Mary's death warrant, a moment of irreversible consequence, forever altered her perception of herself and her role as queen. The political machinery, once hidden, was now visible in its stark and brutal reality. Elizabeth, though acting in every moment, knew now that she was acted upon, a pawn in a game of religious conflict and dynastic ambition far larger than herself. The fear, once a whisper in the halls of Hatfield, now resonated in the very stones of her palaces. Each shadow seemed to conceal a potential assassin, each friendly face a mask for betrayal. The cost of her crown was etched in the lines on her face, a silent testament to the sacrifices she had made. The triumphs were fleeting, the anxieties ever present. Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, remained vigilant, her gaze fixed on the horizon, ever watchful for the next storm. The weight of the crown pressed heavily upon her brow, a constant reminder of the power she wielded and the dangers she faced. The scratching of the quill against parchment was the only sound in the dimly lit chamber. Elizabeth stared at the document before her, the death warrant for Mary, Queen of Scots. Every line, every word, felt like a physical weight pressing down on her. Years of plotting, years of suspicion, years of near misses had culminated in this moment. The evidence was irrefutable. Mary had been deeply implicated in the Babington plot, a conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the English throne. The Privy Council, with near unanimous fervor, had demanded Mary's execution for the safety of the realm. Yet, Elizabeth hesitated. Mary was family, however distant. Mary was a queen, anointed by God. To execute her would be a grave act, one that would reverberate across Europe, inciting the wrath of Catholic powers, especially Spain. Yet, to allow Mary to live was to invite further plots, further rebellions, further instability. The safety of England, the welfare of her people, demanded a decision only she could make. Days turned into weeks as Elizabeth wrestled with her conscience. She paced the corridors of Whitehall Palace, sleepless, tormented by visions of war and rebellion. She consulted her advisors, listened to their arguments, weighed their counsel. Some urged swift execution, emphasizing the existential threat Mary posed. Others cautioned against it, warning of the dire consequences for England's standing in the world. William Cecil, Lord Burghley, her most trusted advisor, presented the cold, hard facts, laying bare the dangers of inaction. Sir Francis Walsingham, her spymaster, presented irrefutable proof of Mary's complicity, gleaned from intercepted letters and secret informants. Finally, After weeks of agonizing deliberation, Elizabeth made her decision. She signed the death warrant. It was not an act of malice, nor of revenge, but of necessity, an act of duty to her crown and her country. She entrusted the warrant to William Davison, her secretary, with instructions to deliver it to the authorities at Fotheringhay Castle, where Mary was imprisoned. However, even in signing the warrant, Elizabeth remained ambivalent. She hinted to Davison that perhaps its execution could be delayed, or even avoided altogether. She spoke of finding other means to secure the realm, perhaps through a carefully negotiated treaty or some other diplomatic solution. This ambiguity would later plague her, as she sought to distance herself from the execution, claiming it had been carried out without her explicit consent. On February 8, 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, was beheaded at Fotheringhay Castle. The execution was swift and brutal. Mary faced her death with dignity and courage, proclaiming her innocence to the very end. News of the execution spread like wildfire across Europe, igniting a storm of protest and outrage. Catholic monarchs condemned Elizabeth as a tyrant and a heretic. Philip II of Spain, already harboring ambitions to conquer England, seized upon the execution as the final justification for his long-planned invasion. England braced itself for war. Elizabeth, despite her initial attempts to distance herself from the execution, rallied her people. She addressed Parliament, vowing to defend her kingdom against all enemies, foreign and domestic. She appointed Lord Howard of Effingham as Lord High Admiral, entrusting him with the command of the English fleet. She authorized the construction of new warships and the strengthening of coastal defenses. She called upon privateers, such as Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Hawkins, to harass Spanish shipping and disrupt their preparations for war. The Spanish Armada, a vast fleet of over 130 ships, set sail from Lisbon in the summer of 1588, its mission to conquer England and restore Catholicism to the realm. The Armada was a formidable force, equipped with the most advanced weaponry, and manned by experienced sailors and soldiers. The English fleet, though smaller in number, was more maneuverable and better armed with long-range cannons. The two fleets clashed in the English Channel, in a series of engagements that lasted for several days. The English, using their superior gunnery and tactics, inflicted heavy damage on the Spanish ships. They employed fireships, setting them ablaze and sending them drifting into the heart of the Armada, causing chaos and destruction. The Armada, battered and demoralized, attempted to retreat back to Spain, but was caught in a violent storm off the coast of Scotland and Ireland. Many ships were wrecked and thousands of sailors were lost. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was a decisive victory for England, securing its independence and establishing it as a major naval power. The skill and courage of the English sailors, the superior design and weaponry of the English ships, the strategic brilliance of the English commanders, and the intervention of divine providence. But above all, it was a testament to the resilience and determination of the English people, united under the leadership of their queen. Elizabeth, hailed as the savior of England, became a symbol of national pride and unity. Her popularity soared, and her authority was strengthened. She continued to rule with wisdom and skill, guiding England through a period of unprecedented prosperity and cultural achievement. The Elizabethan era became a golden age of English arts, literature, and exploration. Shakespeare wrote his plays, Marlowe his poems, Raleigh explored the New World, Drake circumnavigated the globe. England flourished as never before, its influence spreading across the seas and its culture enriching the world. Elizabeth never married. She remained the Virgin Queen, wedded to her country and her people. She used the prospect of marriage as a political tool, negotiating alliances and securing advantages for England. But she never relinquished her independence, never allowed herself to be controlled by a husband. As the years passed, Elizabeth grew older, her beauty faded, but her spirit remained strong. She continued to govern with energy and determination, facing new challenges and overcoming new obstacles. She dealt with rebellions in Ireland, conspiracies at court, and diplomatic intrigues on the continent. She remained vigilant against threats to her throne and to the security of her kingdom. In her later years, Elizabeth became increasingly isolated, surrounded by courtiers and advisors, but ultimately alone. She felt the weight of her responsibilities, the burden of her decisions. She had sacrificed personal happiness for the sake of her country, and she often wondered if it had been worth it. Yet, she never wavered in her commitment to England. She believed that she had been chosen by God to rule, and she was determined to fulfill her destiny. She saw herself as the mother of her people, responsible for their welfare and their safety. As she approached the end of her life, Elizabeth became increasingly frail and weak. She suffered from bouts of depression and melancholy. She spent hours alone in her chambers, reflecting on her long and eventful reign. On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth I died at Richmond Palace. She was 69 years old, and she had ruled England for 44 years. Her death marked the end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of a new era in English history. Her passing was met with widespread mourning throughout the land. The people of England had grown to love and respect their queen, who had led them through so many trials and triumphs. She was remembered as a wise and just ruler, a courageous and determined leader, and a symbol of national pride and unity. Elizabeth's legacy endured long after her death. She had transformed England into a major European power, established its naval supremacy, and ushered in a golden age of culture and prosperity. She had defended her country against foreign invasion and internal rebellion, securing its independence and its Protestant faith. She had chosen power over marriage, and she had proven that a woman could rule as effectively, if not more so, than a man. She had become an icon of female leadership, inspiring generations of women to aspire to greatness. Her reign, though marked by political intrigue, religious conflict, and personal sacrifice, was ultimately a triumph. She had left England stronger, more prosperous, and more secure than she had found it. James VI of Scotland, Mary, Queen of Scots' son, succeeded Elizabeth to the English throne, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland. The era of the Virgin Queen was over. A new chapter had begun. The great queen was gone,